Okay, we're gonna try again. If we get a echo, we'll,
I'll just leave that.
yeah. Anyway, this was a headline on Saturday. Of course, it was Friday, the NAR kind of announced a settlement on the Setzer lawsuit, which has been pending for quite a while. And they lost in Missouri, actually, and were assessed, $500 million. So this headline was Saturday morning in the New York Times. Powerful realtor group agrees to slash commissions to settle lawsuits. Of course, nothing like that happened. That's just the New York Times, but this is what the public reads, right? That powerful realtor group slashes commissions. Well, that obviously wasn't the decision, the settlement. So there are some things. A webinar, guy was doing a webinar, and he said he's going to cover the facts of the settlement, how the settlement will be impacted by, how the consumer will be impacted by this news, how buyers' agents will get paid moving forward, how to adapt to these changes that are coming, why those who adapt will come out ahead and those who don't will be left behind, and the silver lining of this ruling or settlement. And then he ends with this comment: this settlement is likely to yield the biggest change to our industry in my lifetime, 20 years of being licensed. So, so we'll cover the facts first, which is, it's pretty simple, actually. So there are two things that NAR proposed in a factual way, besides paying money and getting, trying to get all of us out of the lawsuit, which we were never going to be exposed to anyway. But they did agree to these two things, or propose these two things. This is subject to court approval, and if the court approves it, it won't be effective till July 14th of this year. Okay, those are a couple of facts. But the two things they proposed are the compensation offers will be moved off the MLS. NAR has agreed to put in place a new rule prohibiting offers of compensation on the MLS. Offers of compensation could continue to be an option consumers can pursue off MLS through negotiation and consultation with real estate professionals. And sellers can offer buyer concessions on an MLS, for example, concession for buyers' closing costs. So they can put that in the remarks area. But up until now, NAR has had a model rule, and all MLSs have followed it, including Barris, which is our MLS, that you have to put in a compensation. Now, it could be zero, but you had to put something in. Now, the rule is going to be, you can't put anything. Okay. So how are we going to deal with that? Second thing that they...
Why did they do that?
Okay, we'll come back. Let me get the facts out first. The second thing that they're proposing is that all MLS participants working with buyers will have written agreements. So that's what we've been talking about in the last, several months, these buyer representation agreements. And remember, Broker Risk Management, our risk management team is having a webinar on Monday with a deep dive into buyer representation agreements. So I encourage you to all sign up for that.
This is Harper?
No, that's Broker Risk Management. I'll send out the link again today. So those are the only two proposals that are there. Now, I'll call on Isaac here, because in the commercial world, LoopNet and CoStar, the two databases that are basically the commercial MLS, have never stated what the compensation is for working on the property, right?
It's in LoopNet.
It is in LoopNet?
Mhm.
What does it say? A percentage?
Compensation? Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Oh, okay. I,
Okay,
that's new to, from the last time I was in there.
okay.
But CoStar doesn't have that?
I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, it was common in the commercial world not to know exactly what the commission was going to be paid on something. So you, when you called the listing agent, who had a lease, property for lease or property for sale, you asked them. You said, okay, what's the compensation here?
It's usually negotiable anyway.
Right. So, and that's what it's going to be. It's basically going to be negotiable. So we're going to, you know, first of all, if we're working with buyer, we're going to have a buyer broker agreement, and it's going to have a number in it. And that number is going to be what, you know, we at this point, as a broker, you know, we expect 2.5% to 3%, depending on the price of the property, in our listings or in our buyer representation agreements. But they are all negotiable. But that the story we've talked about in the last couple of weeks about how we going to have to be able to express our value to the client. What do we do for the client? That's going to become more and more important because they're going to ask, well, why should I pay?
So Gary, is this part of the closing costs? Can you consider it closing costs?
No, commissions are not, agent compensation is not closing costs that could be disclosed or buyer concessions that could be disclosed in the MLS. No, that's not what they're proposing. Now, there's other things here. Cover this here.
But likely the buyer's agent would encourage some sort of concessions to compensate for that.
From the seller, yeah. We'll get to that in a second. So these are other headlines that are industry-based headlines, like in Inman and so forth. These say, this one says chaos, consolidation, and opportunity. Okay. This one says, thanks to NAR settlement, real estate is in the Wild West era.
Yep.
And this one says, an anticipated settlement still shocks the real estate industry. So here's a few other quotes from some of these articles. I've been just kind of reading everything I can here. The changes are widely expected to add transparency and complexity to the way buyers agents are paid, with several industry experts saying that commissions and possibly home prices will fall as a result. So that's some industry experts are saying it. I haven't heard anyone say that commissions are going to go up. This is another quote. On a scale of 1 to 10, the National Association of Realtors' decision to shift the buyer side commission burden from sellers to buyers is a 10 and represents nothing short of a sea change. This new landscape means a steeper climb for all agents who are going to have to prove their value to potential clients. What have you done for me lately? What am I going to do for you? You know, why am I even doing this? That's the important thing. Why am I doing it? Another quote, the learning curve is going to be huge, and the biggest challenge will be getting all agents on the same page on how to do it, to do things the proper way, whatever that is. We will be up against a lot of confusion, misinformation, and misunderstandings between agents and consumers alike. Sounds like fun, right?
Develop a couple of forms to cover.
Well, they've got to be developed. Another quote, now is a free-for-all. The rules are, there are no rules. And don't think for 1 second that there won't be those trying to find ways to dodge paying hardworking agents. That's I mean, on Friday afternoon, Anna, my life partner, went on a listing appointment. And she's been talking to this client for a while and they were getting ready to sign papers, sign the listing. He said, I only want to pay 2.5%. I said, "Oh, okay. So you don't want to pay, see that the buyer's agent gets paid. Well, this is the ramifications of that. And she had to start, explain that if you don't pay the buyer's agent, then you may get fewer buyers come to look at your property because their agent's not going to be paid. So I mean, that happened as early as Friday afternoon. So we do have that form that explains, what broker risk management talked about was when we talked to our sellers, we decouple the amount they're going to pay us as listing agent. That's the value we're worth as a listing agent. And then what we're decoupling from is the marketing strategy about how we present this to the public. So we can present it where the seller builds into his price a commission for the buyer's agent. Then buyer's agent's going to scramble to sell your property. Or, you could offer some other different amount, but somewhere between what I'm worth as your listing agent, what you feel the buyer's agent is worth. Or you could offer nothing, and so that's a decoupling. We've got to talk about those three things with your listing, your seller when you're listing the property, and then you list it for, we were up in, or having our Mingtree meeting on Monday, and we were announcing new listings. And so one of the agents goes through describing the property, the price, and it has 3 bedrooms and 2 baths and this address. And then she adds, and she says, and the seller is offering a full 2.5% commission to the buyer's agent. It's like, oh, this is a new fact we have to disclose now. We're going to talk about this. So, question came up last week that should I take, again on Friday, an agent called and said, well, should I take what's in the MLS being offered in the MLS out of the MLS now? And I said, no, don't do that. This is still a proposal. Even if it's approved, it won't be effective till July. And in the meantime, we're going to continue to work as we are. So continue to talk to your sellers the way you have. We're going to continue to display it in the MLS until we're told not to. Right. And Barris is obviously meeting around this along with all the other MLSs around the country. But in the meantime, that field is going to still be there in the MLS. This was an interesting thing. So that you've heard of the brokerage, the agency. Some of you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So they were formed several years ago, and this guy Mauricio Umansky is one of the founders. And he and another guy decided they're going to form a new national association for real estate agents and brokers, apart from NAR. So they're kind of setting up this competing entity. Now, I don't know what they're going to do with it, but anyway, so he said yesterday, on Friday, he called for changes to the mortgage rules that would allow buyers to be able to finance their agent's compensation.
Well, that's what they do now anyway, right?
Exactly. But exactly. But if it's going to be paid from the buyer's side and not the seller's proceeds, what he's proposing makes perfect sense is that Fannie Mae and FHA and Freddie Mac recognize that this amount that the buyer's having to pay their agent can be financed with the rest of the purchase of the property. So if you've got $1 million property and a $25,000 commission, you can get a loan on $1,025,000, not just on $1 million.
So it's gonna be different for taxes possibly.
Good, yeah, tax ramifications, I haven't even heard anyone talking about that yet.
Well, you're not paying for the house, you're paying, so that would be bringing the price of the house down, so your taxes.
Yeah,
would
the
be
tax,
lower.
the real estate taxes would be lower potentially because the commission is not built into
Right.
it. But I think, I haven't bought a house in a while, but I think the commission I paid, if I pay out of pocket, my closing costs, I can deduct those.
Yeah.
So if I were paying the commission in cash, I probably could deduct that. But if it's being financed, can I deduct it and finance it as well? You know, there will be tax ramifications to figure out.
Jerry, it seems like this is gonna cost the buyer more money. Yes.
Yes.
Because I'm gonna list my house for $1 million. My house is worth $1 million. And okay, I used to have to pay the 3% of going out the other door. Well, now I don't have to pay it. The buyer's gotta pay it. It comes on top of the $1 million. I don't think the sellers are gonna reduce the price by the commission that they're not having to pay.
They might be forced to.
I think psychologically, they're gonna say, you know, $1 million, $1 million. And then the buyer's gotta pay extra. Buyer didn't used to have to pay the commission, now they have to pay the commission.
Especially with a first time home buyer, you know,
Yeah.
like some young couple and they're asked if
Right.
they come up with an additional 2.5%. Just similar to what you know,
Right.
it's gonna make it hard for them to, it's already a struggle for them to get in and then they're supposed to.
Well, now it's the purchase price plus the commission.
Yes.
Is the purchase price really
And
gonna
it
go
goes
down
plus.
because they're not paying the buyer's side of the commission? I don't think so.
Well, I think across the board, if you were on the other side,
What other side?
if you were the buyer's agent,
Right?
right, you're gonna negotiate that. Or you're gonna find a
Yeah,
different
and,
house.
yeah,
I think, right? If you
right,
put
right. If
yourself
you
in
can't
that
come out of
position,
pocket with that fee and you can't get the seller to pay it,
yeah, you're gonna go somewhere else.
you're gonna go somewhere else. Now,
Yeah.
you raised a good question a couple weeks ago, Eric, that you said, well, I thought because we were talking about negotiating the commission as part of the RPA.
Right.
And you said, well, I thought our code of ethics says we couldn't negotiate the commission as part of our, you know, the transaction.
Right.
What's happening there when when we have a buyer representation agreement and we check that box on the RPA, the G3E, I think it is, which says we're asking the seller to pay this amount of the commission because I have a buyer broker agreement. We're asking the seller to pay that. And here's an SPPP or an SPBB form, the seller participating in the broker's commission, whatever those an acronym is. And you submit that along with the RPA. That negotiation is not between the agents and the seller or the buyer. That's between the buyer and the seller. So we aren't negotiating that per se, the buyer and the seller.
We're facilitating it.
Hmm?
We're facilitating the agreement.
Yes, so, I mean, what the rule was and the ethical thing was if the agent, this listing agent's offering 2% in the MLS, we had to accept it. We couldn't go in and say, well,
Right, that was a term of.
that was an agreement, the MLS amount offer was an agreement between agents and brokers. So we had to accept that if we wanted to do the deal.
Right.
Now, what we're saying is the buyer and the seller are negotiating the commission between them because the buyer is obligated to pay it under the buyer representation agreement. He's rolling his eyes.
So we have no say.
No, I mean, we do have to say, because that's when we write up our buyer brokers agreement, there's very important boxes to check in there. That say, you buyer authorized me as your agent to put into the RPA that you want the seller to pay this.
But we're not gonna do that anymore.
Yeah, we are.
Oh, in the real estate, I'm sorry.
Yeah, in the RPA.
Yeah.
Not in the MLS. So that's important that the buyer agree to that, you know? Well, a couple more quotes here. As interest rates go down and housing inventories increase, real estate professionals, this is just talking about the market and the impact of this. Real estate professionals, not just salespeople, real estate professionals will face a very bright future. Lower commissions, but many more sales. Because the number of agents, most of whom have little experience, not talking about you, Sarah, I mean, Samantha, will decline dramatically. So the expectation from that person is that inexperienced agents, you know, will just throw up their hands because they haven't learned this. So, but it's incumbent upon us experienced agents and new agents to get a handle on how this is going to work and stick with it. I mean, there's going to be more business out there as the interest rates come down, which they expect later in the summer. But we're going to have to figure out, like they said earlier, figure out how this is going to work. Okay.
As I mentioned to you, I listened to that car
Yeah.
legal town hall, and they don't have it figured out yet. You know,
You're just
it's
gonna answer that question,
obvious
yeah.
that they were still trying to figure everything out, and they brought up the whole thing about lenders, and they're gonna have to work with lenders to the lender association to figure that out. So, yeah, it just seems sort of, when I listened to it, it seemed sort of chaotic or
Chaos.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a Pandora's box, because I think the goal was to clarify. I think it's gonna muddy the water as to who's working for who's paying who. Granted, we're gonna have all these forms that spell it out, but do the buyers and sellers really understand what they don't wanna read on the forms that we're now giving them? Well, what does it say? You know, they don't wanna read them. You got a 15-page purchase agreement, and then
I'm just
obviously.
gonna go out front, and say, we need to get paid, and just say it, we gotta get paid, so that's how we get paid.
No, I think
I mean,
it
it's
totally muddies the water as to who's representing who and who should pay what.
Well,
What's the agreement in place and how do I get paid?
yeah, I disagree with you in that respect. I do think, I do think it will become clear that, now, you mentioned earlier
Anything
that
can happen.
you mentioned earlier that the seller paid the commission. No, the buyer always brought the money to the table with their money and the lender's money, and they bought it to the table. And that went to the seller, and from that, the seller paid the buyer's agent.
Yeah. No,
So, you know, it's the buyer's money all along, or nothing's ever happened.
Yeah.
But the reason these lawsuits came around is that the seller says, I didn't understand I was paying that buyer's agent.
Well, he wasn't,
Well, he was.
Seller?
the seller wasn't.
It came out of, you look at his closing statements.
Well, it's not the buyer's money.
I know, and
It's not the buyer's money. The buyer's money goes into a bank account, it's stocks and it's investments, and then there's a debit of X amount of dollars. Was it that dollar that came in and got put out and this thing? No. It went into my bank account
all right.
and it came out
So
of my bank
a
account.
jury of 12 people, ordinary people who aren't real estate experts, heard this case.
Right.
They sat in conference for what, 3
And
hours?
this was in Missouri.
For 3 hours, and they decided real estate industry is all screwed up and it
Yeah.
needs to be fixed, and you have to pay us $500 million. You have to pay those people $500
Yeah.
million. 3 hours, they figured this out.
Yeah.
So that's how confusing it is. So those plaintiffs' counsels who are walking away with the big bucks, once this all the dust settles, who's gonna walk away with the big bucks in this whole thing?
The attorneys.
The attorneys, the plaintiffs' counsel. And they're the ones proclaiming this is, you know, so good for the consumer.
No one's gonna represent them.
Well, the question came up the other day. Okay, so, and we get this, you guys come to me with this question once in a while. It says, okay, the two neighbors, you know, talked and one wants to sell the other. And they came to me because they like me and trust me, and they say, can you just write up the documents for me?
It's so simple.
It's so simple. So, and you come to me and say, can I just write up the documents for them? And what do I say?
No,
No, that's it. This is fraught with danger. I had a friend on the golf course one time, and there's a lake in front of the, you have to drive over the lake to get to the green. And he looks at me and he says, "This is fraught with danger." And I said, "Well, what do you mean fraught? I mean, that's what you get in a latte. That's fraught."
yeah.
You know, he meant fraught with danger. So, yeah. Um,
We're gonna scale on the pond.
yeah, so there's you know, in my office on the corner of the desk, there's a little deep green diagram. Would you grab that for me, Raymond? Thanks. So explaining this to the consumer, I mean, that's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna have to sit down and when you're working with a seller, you're gonna have two conversations, you know, say, this is what I'm worth and this is what I charge to do this. And then you say, and this is how we're gonna, I said, you know, these are their options in marketing the property.
Yeah, do you want your house shown?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So and then if you're working with a buyer, we handed out this form, here, take one, just a little while ago. And these are the benefits of buyer representation. So this is the starter with your buyers. When you first meet somebody new and they don't know, trust or like you. And you aren't, as Anna said, sparking joy with them yet. So you have to establish some trust. And, you know, say, here, I want to sign you, I want to have you sign this representation agreement. And they said, well, why should I do that? And this explains why. And if you look at the back of this form, it lists all these buyer services that they can expect from you, their agent. So help in determining your price range, property search, efficient property viewings, property research, insight on list properties, strategic offer structuring, offer presentation, skilled negotiations, legal document guidance, streamlined inspections, mortgage financing, post-closing support. So those, you know, are benefits that the buyer can expect from working with you. So this is a good tool to start with. If you have any suggestions on how to improve it, we'll accept them. I'm working, I woke up the other night and this is before the settlement thing, it had nothing to do with that. But I was trying to think in my own mind, you know, this is a little complicated business in some respects, right? And so I was trying to say, well, what's a simple kind of illustration of how this business works? And this is still a work in progress, but once it's done, I'll make it available because I think it will serve two purposes. This is the sales agent in the middle here. This is the broker. These are the broker services that the broker provides. Marketing, transaction support, education, legal, values, community space. These are all things a broker supplies with an agent. An agent has their clients over here. They work with their clients, their friends and family and SOI. They have these things they want to do and to be successful. They build a team. The team is in alignment with their values and why. Why are they doing this? They choose team members that have the same values and why. The team members are their MLS and their association, their lender, their insurance agent, their title and escrow company, their vendors, the vendors they work with and can trust, they can recommend. So I think, you know, as for a new agent, I think it's, you know, kind of a graphic explanation of, okay, this is how things work. You're doing this work across this way with your clients and working on yourself to be successful. You're looking to the broker for these support items, and you're forming this team to give you support from this direction. So I think it can also be used when we sit down with either a buyer or a seller and start talking about our fee. And we say, you know, our fee isn't just me getting a check for writing up a piece, 15-page contract. That's not it. All these things are involved. All these folks need to be paid out of this transaction for the system to work. These folks need to be paid out of this transaction. So it's not just the simplicity of, oh, write up the paper. There's a lot of experience we bring to the table. Even if we're new, we're bringing life experiences to the table. And as our real estate experience grows, we're bringing that experience to the table as well. And newer agents are leveraging the experience of the brokerage. So you can say, I don't know. This first thing I learned in going out and doing mortgage business is to say, I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that question, but I will find out for you and I'll get back to you right away. Build trust that way. Don't make things up.
Gary. Gary,
Yes, question.
it's Leo.
Leo,
I have a question, but is this lawsuit, is it under appeal or is it just Vinny Laguerre?
no, it was being appealed. NAR appealed the decision of the jury. And so it is in the appeal process, which could take years. But in the meantime, they decided to offer this settlement.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Gary, this, under number 2 here. Although under the terms of the agreement, you're responsible for paying the buyer broker, we view you as the payor of last resort. How does the buyer feel about being the payor of last resort?
The meaning is there, but the wording is a little like. Ooh.
You couldn't get the money from anybody else? The last resort, you're
All
gonna
right,
pay.
all right. We'll take that under advisement.
That doesn't sound too.
I don't wanna be that person.
Okay, I appreciate you pointing that out. Like I say, if we can improve these things, we want to.
The other question is, I assume the buyer broker commission is paid out of buyer's funds at settlement,
Yes.
so they just submit it like a test report bill.
In the past, I've had clients come and say, I want to make an offer on this house. I want to pay my own commission to you. I want to take that as a deduction. I want a lower tax base on my
Right.
purchase. So I'm going to make this offer and say that the seller does not have to pay the buyer's commission. Buyer agent commission.
Should you not be a little afraid that when you get to close of escrow, the buyer says, you know what?
Not with this agreement.
Not with the buyer broker.
Now, all right, so we do 750 transactions a year. How many years we've been working together. So how many times have we ever pursued a commission claim under the listing agreement? Over those 25 years?
0
No, once that I can remember.
on this.
And we lost, actually.
And we
It was not a good outcome. So it's same to be true in this buyer broker agreement. I mean, if there's a breach, how often are we going to go after that buyer for the breach of contract?
It seems like there isn't, if you do it that way, there isn't a mechanism to be paid, you just on good faith that they're gonna cut you a check.
Just like the listing agreement. What is this, what if the seller gets to the closing and say, I don't want to pay, I don't want to pay these commissions
Well,
on
then it doesn't,
cross them out.
then it kind of doesn't close.
Well, it does.
Yes.
They can close it without honoring those separate contracts.
Even.
No,
if
the-
you get
the-
Instructions from title company.
Well, we put in a demand, but
Title
I don't
company
know.
Isn't obligated to.
honor our
Close.
demand?
If
I
you've
don't
got a
know.
demand, it needs to be paid,
I don't know. I don't know.
yeah. It seems like you're losing.
The
mechanism for
escrow
compensation.
company may balk at closing that transaction, yeah.
Right. motivate a buyer to perform and pay as agreed.
Right, right.
Versus cutting your check after close of escrow.
You've answered your own question as always.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have an example. Future buyers,
Yes,
they are listing, they've got their signed listing agreement in San Francisco to pay a 5% commission.
yeah,
And let's say this is fast forward to July or whatever, and then they come here. And there's a possibility then they'll have to pay a commission to purchase
Yes.
a house.
right.
I don't know, that's just how that's gonna work out, you know?
Well, but they
Because
have to
you've already
fundamentally believe that the buyer is paying the commission on the sale of the property.
Oh, okay,
And that they, as the buyer, are paying the commission on the purchase of the property. It's just flipped from
Okay.
how we always said it.
it's just on paper,
You just have to get the seller to swallow it.
right?
We've always had to have it. so
It's just on
Yeah,
paper,
uncomfortable,
look,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
It's normal.
Yeah, it was normal.
So,
Exactly.
let's all tune into the deep dive into the buyer broker agreement, representation agreement again, because it's gonna have new, aspects to it. Even that new disclosure form that we got about a month ago for buyers and sellers about the commission, that's gonna be changed now. So we're gonna have we'll be getting new stuff probably every day this week. So I'll pass it along. Main thing to know is it's the status quo for right now until this legal settlement is accepted. And then it's the effective date is July 14th. We probably will see different changes before July. Because the industry is reacting to this. And trying to make it clearer and figure out how we're gonna work. So just stay involved, stay tuned, CAR is having this thing on Thursday again. We'll see if it's as chaotic as the last one was. I wanted to talk just a second about market conditions. On a national basis, inventory is 22% ahead of a year ago. And the forecast is it's going to be, it could rise to be as high as 40% over what it was a year ago. If interest rates stay at the same level, if they start to drop, then inventory will drop. If interest rates drop, inventory will drop. However, almost, it's predicted that every month for the remainder of this year, we're going to see more listings this year than we saw a year ago. So that's good. The listings today are 105% over what they were in March of 2022. So remember, we had boom period in 2020 and 2021. 2022 started with a very, very low inventory. The inventory today is 105% over what it was in 2022.
Gary, I have a question.
Yeah,
What area are we speaking about?
this is national data.
Thank you.
I'll get to local data. I started national. I worked my way down.
All right, thanks.
Are you saying it's a 105% increase?
105
So it's more than double.
over 2022. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. About a third of the homes are taking a price reduction before they sell. And probably 50 to 60% of the homes have a price reduction at the time they sell. Okay, so the difference there is 30 of them%. You're taking a reduction before it goes into escrow. But 60% of them, when the escrow is so closed, are at a price lower than the original asking price. So 30% of them, held their price until they got into escrow, but that offer was lower than their asking price. Only 25% of the properties are selling at more than their asking price right now. Which in 2021, we were seeing like 70% of the properties selling over asking price. The peak of the new home list prices is usually in June. June of 22 was a record high for new listing sales prices. Whether we'll get up to that number this year or not, is, we won't know till June, but that's what we should see. Listing prices continue to go up and until June, and then they start to come down again. Prices on the national basis are up 4% year over year for pending sales. Locally, our inventory in the Sonoma Valley was 15%. This is for February. At the end of February, it was 15% above the inventory of last February. So we had 70 listings in the Sonoma Valley as opposed to 61 a year ago. They were 9% ahead of last month. So we're seeing that seasonal increase that we typically see in the market. So this is a graph of the Sonoma Valley. The green bars are the inventory. So you can see we start the year and it goes up slowly, and then this is May, where it jumps up, and then through the summer stays up high. So this is a pretty typical pattern here.
What's the differential, those two color bars?
The light green ones are listings, the dark green ones are closings. The red line is sales. So you can see sales are kind of wavy. They just come and go depending on the market conditions. But the inventory and is pretty solid pattern. And you can see the start of this year, this is January, that we're just climbing towards the same way we did last year. But we should have a spike usually the spike here is predicated by what?
After taxes.
No, no. Rainy season. Right? The rainy season stops, the weather gets good, people put their homes on the market. They don't want to sell in the downpour when their landscaping looks like crap. So, that's why last year it was May. I think we'll have an earlier, we're having maybe an earlier spring. And we might get more activity in April than we did last year. We should. Okay. There were 16 closings last month. 90% of they sold at 97% of original list price. So that's a pretty solid number. There's a credit to the agents for listing them at prices at which they would sell. Top quartile, the top 25% of the listings in the county are in the valley. So we have 70 listings. The top 20 of them are priced at what?
Million or more.
3.4, Leo. Quarter of the inventory is priced at 3.4 million or more. So, yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of this is all in the blog, which I sent out earlier this week. So, yeah, Alex.
Days on market.
Days on market, 73 days for Sonoma Valley for those closings, those 16 closings.
That's a little bit high, isn't it?
It's relatively high. Days on market, I don't, let's see.
That's list dependent.
Our days on market are counted from the list date to the pending date, not to the closing date. Because it could be another week or 2 weeks after it goes pending that it closes. See, days on market, it was 73 this month, 88 last month, 70 the month before, 51 in November. In the summer months, beginning in April of 2023, it was 47, 42, 37, 43, 39. So in the summer months, we see the sales happening quickly. for last month, 73. So the only last thing I have on this chart, when I finally get it done, Kylie's been great at kind of orchestrating the artwork of it, you know, and the icons and everything. I keep throwing the new changes into at her, but she's been very good at putting it together. But in the sales agent here, and both as in facing their clients and facing their success is my why. Why am I doing this? And you know, we talked about Simon Sinek before. He wrote the book Start With Your Why. You know, starting with your why. And the questions you ask to start with your why are, who am I? Who am I? Why am I here? You know, and that has a very long and reaching kind of answer. I was asked the other day in a group setting in my coaching class, and it's like, what's the hardest question you ever got? You've ever been asked? The hardest question. And that was it for me. Who am I? Some people said, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm like, that was the hardest question they ever had. What do you do? Okay. What do you do based on who you are? Who do you do it to? Who do you do it for? You know, I'm doing this, and why? Who am I doing it for? Why do you need to do this? Why do they need what you do? Why do they need what you do? This gets back to our value as in this transaction thing. They need what we do because we have certain expertise, we have certain experience of this, and this is complicated. This is not, you know, some people think it's kind of easy. I'll just go sell my house. Well, it's not. And how does what I do change their lives? All of this kind of gets to why we're doing it. And when you have figured out your why, then you want to align with folks, your team members, who have an alignment with your why. You may not have the same why, but you want to have them in the same ballpark, right? You want to work with people you know you enjoy working, and we're competent. Okay. That's kind of all I have for this morning. We're approaching the hour. Any questions? We'll hear more on this NAR stuff just daily for a while here. Yeah.
I just have, was thinking because of all of this.
Yeah.
Does that give rise to dual agency or?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. I don't know if you could hear it online there. The question was, will this lead to more dual agency? And I've heard that as a potential outcome of this is that, well, the buyer, I don't want to sign that agreement with you. I'm just going to go with the listing agent and I'll write up the offer with them. Because if typically, if that listing agent is going to write both sides, what will they do?
Discount.
Yeah, it's not unusual that the listing agent, if they're going to write the buyer side too, would reduce the commission from what they have agreed to in the listing. So, and because we've said the buyer is paying that commission in the long run anyway, then that's a benefit for the buyer, a reduced commission. Right? So that could happen. That could be an outcome.
Going back to the old way where,
Yeah,
you know, we used to go out and get a listing and went out and got the buyer.
buyer, right.
Try to sell it. So
You're right.
the seller told us to do.
Yeah, and the only caveat in all of that is what is a single agent dual agency?
Hmm.
It's the most risky part of the business we can put our, you know, toes into. You know, if you want to put a big target on your back and turn it towards the lawyers, do single agency, do dual agency. Because that's the first person they're going to come after. Hey, you couldn't represent both those people fairly. You cheated one of them. And they'll just take the sides of the one who feels cheated and wants to sue you and us. So single agent, dual agency is tricky business. I always ask particularly if you are the listing agent, you're gonna be representing the buyer, that you get me, the broker, involved through the negotiation phase. So at least there's two parties
Hmm.
separately working with each of the buyer and the seller. You don't want to be kind of carrying that ball back and forth. You want someone, you pass it on to someone else to pass it on to them and then get it back and then get it back. You know, because if you're in the middle there, that's more likely to get you in trouble.
So the brokerage we would sub-agent within the brokerage, is that?
Well, that's, a lot of agents will do that. They get a buyer coming in, they don't like to do the single agent, dual agency. So if Raymond's got a listing and he's got a buyer coming in, he says, I don't like to do single agent, dual agency, so I'd like to refer you to Eric to write your offer. And then he works out an agreement with Eric that, you know, he gets a referral fee for that. So it's one way to handle it. Then there's many agents who are skilled and very careful about that single agent, dual agency, and they can walk that line. But it still does remain the most exposed we are legally. And we really haven't talked about sub-agency per se for a while. A long time. Yeah, it could come back. It's really, when the broker steps in, you know, it's the broker in California anyway, the broker is kind of even though it's the agent doing the transaction, it's the broker's responsibility. So when the listing agent has a buyer and you call me and say, I will usually step in and represent the buyer in writing up the offer. And no, I'm sorry, I'll usually represent the seller at that point because we know what the seller has listed the property for. The listing agent will write up the offer for the buyer. It'll get negotiated and accepted. Then that listing agent comes back and works with the seller.
Right.
It's typically how it.
And that's for the lower, because they're saying, well, I don't want it to be more than 2.5%. You represent both. Is that-
No, it doesn't have anything to do with the commission amount. It just has to do with building in some.
But isn't that how it came up?
Agency.
No, it really came in, it became our policy because we wanted some arm's length between the buyer's agent and the seller's agent.
No, I mean, the reason this came up is because they don't want to pay a higher commission. They
Oh.
want to pay one agent to do both
Yeah,
sides.
well, and so that was the question at the start. Will this lead to more dual agency? It very well could. And like Alex says, in the old days, you got a listing, you were the first one to run out and try to sell it, right? You know,
Knock on doors.
knock on wood. That's Raymond's job.
Yes.
That's kind of what it seems like it's going back to, in my point of view. I mean, granted, like, I wasn't even like born before all this stuff, you know? But that's kind of what it seems like. It's either things are just not going to really change and sellers are going to just basically have more paperwork, the same with buyers, just to sign. Nothing will really change, just more paperwork, or I think it's gonna go back to the way it used to be, which is kind of what a lot of older agents I've noticed, like even on brokerages have talked about. It's gonna go back to the way it was during like the 80s and before. So I mean, what exactly was that like for those of you that have been doing real estate this long?
The dual agency experiences that I've had, what made it really assured to both sides was that if ever there was a conflict that put me in the middle of, you know, really jeopardizing either side's interest, I stepped out, and that's why we were talking about sub-agency.
Mm.
And we brought in within the firm,
Mm.
somebody who would negotiate for one side and the other. And once that little issue got cleared, then I came back in.
Yeah.
And that's how we used to do it. I'm saying.
Yeah, and we still have that practice. We just haven't seen as much dual agency in the last several years. um, we may see it.
And we assure, like, for instance, if you have a listing agent and a conflict does happen, we have assured them that, hey, if you're not feeling like your side's being represented, you're my first priority. I have a listing here.
Yeah.
I will refer that buyer.
Yeah.
Not even within the firm, but to another firm. So
Yeah.
it's a big separation
Yeah, yeah.
between the two.
Yeah.
And we get a referral. I mean, you know, what-
Well, you know, and a lawyers under their code of ethics can't represent two parties in a dispute.
right.
Now, we are allowed to do dual agency. Dual agency is two agents
lawyer
within
stands for it.
in the same firm, or well. Kendra doing a deal with Leo. Does that deal come together?
Yep.
Good, congratulations. And we should talk about some deals, I guess, too. That's dual agency, and single agent dual agency is when Eric has both the buyer and the seller. So, and then putting it outside the company is a third way. But the California law and, you know, real estate law does allow us to do be a fiduciary for two parties in the same transaction because, and I think that's because we don't consider it a dispute, like a legal dispute. We consider it a coming together in a mutual benefit way. Not trying to tear it apart and have a winner and a loser.
So we're a facilitator, not an adversary.
Yeah, we aren't an advocate per se. A fiduciary is different than an advocate. Yeah, I would say.
So Gary,
Yes,
Gary, I'd like to address that transaction with Kendra and I, the idea behind it all.
yes,
In my many years in real estate, I think I've only once ever represented both buyer and seller in a single transaction. I think once in
okay,
40 years. So my approach to these situations is that by referring it to another agent that you have confidence in, that shared client, so to speak,
Mhm.
some a separate entirely representation in their transaction and negotiation.
Mhm.
And that I know it's still regarded as a dual agency because it's the same broker.
Mhm.
But it's arm's length and it's not as susceptible to legal troubles down the road.
Correct, correct, yeah.
So I would advise it for any newer agent to do that if they ever fall upon in their lap.
Right. Good.
That's all.
All right, thank you. Any new listings buyer needs to talk about? Did you get your Roanoke Park property in escrow?
Not yet, we're waiting for the court date,
Oh,
for
okay.
that, so if it's like wilder, then my guess is probably it's gonna be in May, it's my assumption.
But you have a accepted offer subject to court approval?
Yep, yep.
It's a probate, yeah.
What's the offer?
It's 7:45 right now.
Anything else we want to share? Yes, Eric.
I've got a real unique listing coming up that I'm trying to juggle, I'm trying to get him to move and get the property ready. But it's a burned property where the house sustained substantial smoke and some fire damage. And they totally took the house apart. It's on multiple acres, it's up on Trinity Road. It's got great views. And he's wrestled with his insurance company, he's gone as far as he could with the insurance company. I think he probably spent a good chunk of the money from the insurance claim, not on the property, otherwise I think he'd be farther. But it's a contracted property, it's, all the framing has been done, all the deck timber supports have been put in. It's dramatic, but it's like probably ready for sheetrock. So it's bare stud wall on the inside. And I think it needs a high-end contractor, someone that's gonna, finish the product at 2.5 or something. And it's probably gonna get listed $1.2 million or something for its current condition, but I've got one contractor that I would bring it to if I need him to put pen to paper. If I need the seller to put pen to paper, because he needs to sell, so list it. Where are you? What are you doing?
All right. Well, it sounds good. Sounds like
There's
something,
no specific buyer.
yeah,
We,
we have those kind of contractors around the area.
yeah. So when I get it into print, we'll know more.
Great, good. How far up Trinity?
It's actually contiguous to the one I had, the swimming pool house, which is 2 miles. 2.25 miles up Trinity.
Great,
But it's contiguous to the one I sold for $1,425,000.
okay. Great. I've got a couple people that I could present that to.
I'll let him know that we're waiting on him to sign the papers.
That's right. That's good. Anything else? All righty, thanks, and keep learning. We'll all be learning.